Here we have the revolutions in Latin America. Here's just a map showing you the European controlled areas. You have yellow for Spanish, green for Portugal, and that violet is Britain. So what are the causes of the Latin American revolutions? Number one is Enlightenment ideas. You have all sorts of Enlightenment thinkers that we have talked about, and the three that we, of course, spent the most time on were John Locke, Voltaire, and Montesquieu. There was Creole discontent. There was a social hierarchy in the colonies of the Americas, Latin America, and the Creoles were 100% Spanish, and there was one other group that was 100% Spanish, but the Creoles were being left out of government jobs, and pretty much the Peninsulares, who were also 100% Spanish, had control of everything. The Creoles had been born in America, whereas the Peninsulares had not. So the Creoles were very upset that they could not be a part of the government process. They were inspired by the American and French revolutions, and there was this preoccupation that Spain and Portugal had with Napoleon. So if they're busy fighting Napoleon in the Peninsular Wars, they definitely have their eye not necessarily on the Latin American ball. So here's your Enlightenment thinkers. Creole discontent, this is just basically the divisions of Latin American society. You can see, I'm just going to start at the top, the Africans was just a small percentage of Latin America. You have the mestizos, who are half Native American and half European. You have the mulattoes, who are half Native American and half black. And you have the Peninsulares and the Creoles, both of whom are Europeans. The big difference between the two are that the Creoles were born in the Americas, and so of course the Peninsulares had more privilege because they came and were born in Spain. The Indians, again, are the largest percentage, or in this instance we call them Native Americans, at 55.8%. The Creoles, again, were the second largest group. Peninsulares is kind of lumped in here, but it's a very small percentage are the Peninsulares. So again, as we said before, the Peninsulares are people living in Latin America but born in Spain, and they had control of pretty much everything government-wise. The Creoles were Spaniards, mom and dad were Spanish, but they were born in America, and they had no control in terms of government involvement. Again, just a reminder about the different groups and the mixed groups as well. The greatest percentage of the population, again, in Latin America was the Native Americans. Okay. American and French revolutions, of course, we have the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen over here, and then we, of course, have the Declaration of Independence, which are very representative of Enlightenment ideas. The preoccupation of Spain and Portugal, as we had said, in the Napoleonic Wars. We had the Peninsular Wars here. The French guerrillas, the Spanish guerrillas were fighting against the Napoleon's troops as they were trying to make their way into Portugal because Portugal had violated the continental system. Napoleon, again, is this model of military strength, but he is most definitely also a diversion. The Spanish and Portuguese are involved with him in Europe. So here's just in blue, you can see the revolutions. In the revolutions, you have these battles that were being waged there in blue against the Spanish. You have the orange one for Haiti against the French, and the year, of course, when it was. And then Brazil is a bloodless revolution, but there is a transfer of power, creating Brazil as an independent nation. Toussaint L'Ouverture leads the revolution in Haiti in 1804. Again, the island itself had been actually half French, half Spanish colonies. And the one over here on the left, the Saint-Domingue, was pretty much controlled by the French, and it was a slave colony. And the slaves were working the sugar and coffee plantations. It's a very wealthy colony, probably one of the most well-productive colonies in the world. But Toussaint L'Ouverture, who was born a free African American, pretty much was the one who led the way for this successful revolution against the French. So the French really were at a disadvantage because, number one, they weren't on their home turf. They had to come across the Atlantic Ocean to fight against the slave army or the rebels. Also, there was just this feeling of intense nationalism on the part of the Haitians. These people wanted their freedom, and they were very passionate about it. But you can see the numbers. There were 100,000 slaves to 23,000 French troops. So even though the French troops were well trained and they had good weapons, the slaves outnumbered them incredibly. There was disease also that Europeans succumbed to called yellow fever. And again, the geography just got in the way, and it was very difficult for France to send troops over to fight against the Haitians. And so Napoleon pretty much threw in the towel, withdrew his troops, gave Haiti its independence, and then shortly thereafter sold the Louisiana Purchase to the Americans so that he could focus all of his energy in Europe. So again, when you look at the Haitian rebels, their heart was most definitely their greatest advantage against the French soldiers. And again, it's that power of nationalism, people with a common culture and a common language all working together for a common cause. This revolution is the first one in Latin America and is most significant because it sets up the first black republic in modern history. This, again, was the first colony to free itself from European control. It wasn't predominantly African colony, and this nationalistic fever that spread through the slave population through the leadership of educated men who had been never enslaved, like Toussaint L'Ouverture, really proved to be more powerful and were able to conquer the Europeans. Simón Bolivar is a Creole. He led a revolution in South America, and you can see New Granada is a colony of the Spanish that he had pretty much led his revolutionary efforts. He was called Libertador. Again, you're talking about New Granada, which is Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. And they used guerrilla warfare. This was very key in their success against a very organized, well-trained Spanish army. And again, you can't see it really too well on the bottom, but he did meet the forces, the revolutionary forces of San Martin, who was coming up from Rio de la Plata. And the two of them met up, and so you see this large area that was freed from Spain. José de San Martin, as I had said to you before, is the revolutionary leader of Rio de la Plata. He's a humble and strict military man. He was the liberator of Rio de la Plata, which is Argentina, Chile, and Peru. You can see that each has a little piece of Peru. After much success in battle, he hands the forces over to Bolivar in Ecuador and sails for Europe. So San Martin gave up his power to Bolivar and then mysteriously leaves and goes to Europe, where he died very alone, and it just was a mystery as to why he kind of handed everything over to Bolivar after he had had so much success in Argentina, Chile, and of course Peru. Again, he dies almost forgotten in 1850 in France. Okay, so as you can see, the Viceroyalty of New Granada up here at the top, the Viceroyalty of Peru, technically another colony that we kind of didn't talk too much about, but Rio de la Plata and New Granada are the most important regions, and we include Peru in both of these revolutionary movements in these colonies. Simón Bolivar and José de San Martin meeting in their famous coming together in Ecuador, where San Martin hands over control of his forces to Bolivar. And Bolivar and San Martin most definitely were very successful in their campaigns because of guerrilla warfare. San Martin also had a gentleman by the name of Bernardo Higgins who helped him out in the area of Chile. But Bolivar, once he had control of all these freed lands from Spain, he was very unhappy because he was envisioning this one gigantic country that was South American. And the various regions didn't want to unite. And he became very disgusted with this chaos that existed after independence. He did die in 1830, and the idea of uniting South America into one country was unfulfilled. So what happened with these Latin American states? You can see all of them here. You can see Bolivia, named after Simón Bolivar, and then, of course, Central America and the Caribbean has all sorts of different places that are marked off as independent, and the year that also goes with each country. Mexico ends Spanish rule. Now, we did Mexico today for the most part. The Creole priest, Miguel Hidalgo, pretty much started the whole thing, and his rebels were mostly mestizos and Native Americans, and he was pretty much just pleading the cause of the poor, the peasantry in Mexico. These 60,000 Indians, or Native Americans, and mestizos form an army, and they fight against the Spanish army. The Spanish army is made up of Creoles and Peninsulares, so the Creoles are on the Spanish side in Mexico. Hidalgo, of course, is defeated in 1811. Now, there is another rebel before that. His name is Morelos, and he is not listed here, but he was also defeated, and he was defeated by this character, who is Agustin de Iturbide. And Agustin de Iturbide joined the soldiers, or his Creole soldiers, and himself joined the rebels in 1821 and achieved Mexican independence from Spain. And he actually declared himself emperor, and his reign didn't last very long. He was pretty much overthrown almost immediately, and Mexico just plain old remained unstable in the years that followed. There was all kinds of political, economic, and social problems that plagued the country, but at least they had achieved their independence from Spain. Now, here's the bloodless revolution. Portugal had control of Brazil, and the royal family had escaped Napoleon by fleeing to Brazil because it was a colony of theirs. And when the smoke cleared, so to speak, and the royal family was to return to Portugal, Dom Pedro, who is the son of the king, set up a new independent kingdom in Brazil with, the father's okay. And in 1821, he became the leader of this new independent country, which they, of course, was called Brazil. So the independent countries of Latin America become separate. There are several countries, all because of geographic factors and cultural differences. So there is no unity among the regions that are now liberated from Spain. Again, they struggle with civil wars and dictatorships. The wars disrupted trade, and the wars also devastated many cities in the countryside, so economically they were really hurting. There were feuds again among the leaders. You have the geographic barriers that I mentioned before. You have the social hierarchy that still exists, despite the fact that, of course, they wanted equality within the social classes. That definitely did not continue. They had the groups, the mestizos, the mulattoes, the Creoles had all the power at this point. Conservatives and liberals, you have the conservatives, of course, wanting the old social order, the hierarchy, and the liberals wanting land reform for the people so that they too can have rights of property. The dependence that they had on foreign nations for capital and economic investments, really, once those foreign nations were gone, because of course they had gotten their independence, they were pretty much devastated economically, and they had a lot of work to do in terms of getting themselves back on their feet. And that's it. So we'll see you tomorrow.